I grew up in Oregon. Is anybody from Oregon? Anybody from California? A couple people from California. I grew up in Oregon, and I didn't really grow up in a big part of Oregon. I didn't grow up in Portland. I actually grew up outside of a little town called Eugene, out in the country, the middle of nowhere. Growing up in Eugene in the country, as a young boy in the 70s, I was excited about leaving. That's the one thing that I cared about, the opportunity to go somewhere else where there was an opportunity for me to do something bigger, to do something better, where the environment was exciting. I wanted to leave and I wanted to move to California. I wanted to be in California because the promise of California was huge, absolutely huge. And for a young boy from Oregon, there was nothing more exciting about that promise for me, what I could do personally and what potentially I could do professionally. That story is not an uncommon story, by the way. In fact, it goes back almost a century. In 1848, there's a guy named James Marshall. Does anybody know who James Marshall is? James Marshall was a carpenter from Vermont. And James Marshall was a carpenter from Vermont who moved to Colma, California. And in Colma, California, James Marshall worked at a sawmill. And in the sawmill one afternoon, James Marshall was walking by the stream at a sawmill, and he saw two shiny flecks in the side of the riverbank. And he went to them and he picked them up, and he thought they were interesting, and he couldn't quite place what the mineral was that he had in his hands. And what it turned out that James had was gold. In fact, James Marshall is the person who is widely recognized as starting the gold rush in California in 1848. So why is that relevant and important? Because when James Marshall found gold and the gold rush started to happen, everybody in the 1800s, late 1800s, got excited just the same way that I did as a kid. There's opportunity, there's prosperity. California has something better, so I need to find out how to get there. So the first people that found their way to California were the people from Oregon, Hawaii, and Mexico. And that makes sense, right? It's the easiest access. But there were a lot of people in America at that time, and most of those people that were in America were actually on the East Coast. And so they had to find their way west. And this was some of the big movements that happened in the United States in the late 1800s. And what was interesting about the paths that these settlers and these gold rushers took were that they really found two ways to get to California. And the first way that people chose to get to California was actually heading to the north, going through Colorado and then coming back down through the top part of California and in Oregon. And that was a pretty rough path. It was a pretty rough path, but there was something about that path that actually made it okay and that most people did well. And that's that it was completely abundant with the riches of food and water and even shelter if they needed it. So the people that came through the north actually had a pretty good chance of surviving and making it to California and taking advantage of some of the things that were happening during the gold rush. But there was another path. Some of you may recognize this topographic map. There's actually a pretty big line across the middle of it and a big name on it, Death Valley. Death Valley wasn't always called Death Valley. In the late 1800s, it was not called Death Valley. But these settlers that were coming across America that decided they wanted to go south to take an easier route, to take a route where they could get to California and not deal with the mountains, not deal with the cold in the winter. They chose to go south. And what happened to them? Unfortunately, many of them died. Many of them died trying to pass through Death Valley. It's now called Death Valley. Now, why is that relevant to us? Content marketing, right now, is the gold rush. Everybody in marketing is thinking about content marketing. How do I effectively produce content? How do I make content that's relevant to my business? Content marketing is the gold rush. Azita introduced me. My name is Jascha Kaykas-Wolff. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company, Mindjet, here in San Francisco. I've been a customer and a partner of Get Satisfaction for over 5 years now. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to be here today. I want to talk to you about content marketing and about those two paths that we can take. So what's that relationship between the gold rush and between those two paths that settlers could take in the late 1800s and what is happening today in content marketing? Well, the paths that marketers are choosing is dependent upon how they choose to produce content, where they're getting the content from that's actually helping drive their business, assuming it's driving their business forward. There really are one or two different paths. You create content internally. You have a staff that understands how to research. You develop that content, or you hire from the outside. In both cases, there's a path that you can go, and in one way, it's actually a little bit more challenging for you. That path is not looking to the resources that you have internally. Producing content using external agencies, external teams, while it may be successful in the short run, is going to land you in a place that you don't want to be, and that's in Death Valley. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about a company that maybe not all of us think about as a great content marketing company, but a company that's grown faster than any company in really the history of companies in the internet. And they actually use content marketing to grow. And then we'll tie it back together on how this relates to your business and what we can do with our communities. How many of you were on Facebook in 2005 and 6? So not everybody here, in fact, not the vast majority of people. In 2006, Facebook, let's think about Facebook like a marketing campaign, was really devoid of interesting content, in large part because it was just a connection, a group of people, and a limited set of information, and most interestingly, a very limited amount of engagement that you could have with the people that were in that community. Right? You could poke people, you could update what you were eating for dinner, you could update what you were having for lunch, but there wasn't really a lot happening there. What grew Facebook? It wasn't because Facebook grew an amazing platform. They do have a fantastic platform, but it wasn't because their technology was better. At the time, MySpace had a much larger presence, more people, more interesting technology, more customizable. What Facebook did that was unique and interesting is that they grabbed the power of the content that was being produced in their community to really drive their growth. Facebook looked to a couple of different areas. The first was the business community. Right? How do I take the community that's interested in my customers, bring them to my customers, and let them interact with each other? Facebook today is around 1.1 billion people a month. I think it's actually just about 1 billion people a month from the last quarterly earnings. 1.1 billion people a month use their product. And they don't use their product because their product is just fantastic. They use it because there are 42 million different businesses that share interesting content. There are 9.7 million different applications that are producing content that people can interact with. This is the community producing content, and that community producing content is actually what's growing Facebook right now, and will continue to. So what do we need to do to think about that? How do we need to apply that to our businesses? Well, we all know what we care about as a business. We have our internal ideas. The challenge for us is to not let third parties produce that content for us, but actually look to our community to bring those external ideas internally and use that to develop content. It's a simple story, but it's challenging to execute. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you a few different examples of what we've been doing at Mindjet in particular, how we've been using Get Satisfaction also to drive the development of our content, really using our community. And this actually expands much broader than just the content that we use in marketing. This expands all the way out to how we position our product and even the products, the packages, and the pricing that we have in the marketplace. How many of you are in marketing? Some, a few, many? This is a list of all of your priorities for 2013. It's a list of my priorities for 2013. There's not a shortage of people telling us what we need to be accomplishing on behalf of our business in 2013. The reality is that it doesn't really have a relationship to our business. This is a hugely oversimplified view of the way that marketing works within your organization. We ultimately have to help, just like the sales organization does, just like the product organization does, drive real value. Sales for our product, engagement inside of our product, renewals for our product. And the way that we think about it, Mindjet, our community, and how our community and the content that it produces is integrated directly into this pipeline, this funnel, this buyer's journey, is in 3 key areas: awareness, consideration, and retention. So let me go into some detail around what I mean there. There's a presupposition that marketing has to develop a perfect idea. We have to create the perfect campaign that has the right message, that gets developed and is released, and nothing changes. It just works perfectly. I'm sure that all of you here understand that that doesn't really work anymore. Practically speaking, it just fails. Right? We see analogs to what we're dealing with in marketing right now in other parts of our business. If you look at the developers that you work with on your team, they're not creating the perfect product and putting it onto a disk and shipping it out. They're developing a product in an agile fashion. They're getting interactions with your customers, and they're making changes to the product because of that feedback. Why would you not do that in marketing? This will date me a little bit, but let me explain to you the way that we think about marketing programs. There was a comedian that was particularly popular in the 80s and the early 90s. His name was Gallagher. Does anybody remember Gallagher? So we talk about one really important idea in our business as it relates to our community, and that's basically getting to the same punchline that Gallagher did. Gallagher wasn't very funny. Gallagher had a watermelon and a bunch of other things, and he would smash them, hit them with a mallet. And it would spray all over the crowd. And that was actually the fun of his shows. That's why it was enjoyable, because if you were sitting in the front, you had to have a tarp and pull it over your head. If you were sitting 3 rows back, you were going to get stuff on your face, and you were going to be hiding with the neighbor that you had next to you. It created a really interesting and communal environment in his shows. marketing programs and how they interact with your community are just as important today. So let me tell you a little bit about a program that we've been running for the last year. This program for us started about 7 months ago. So that's an interesting statement in and of itself. We actually don't develop individual campaigns. We come up with themes or topics, we produce them, begin, and then we iterate continually. What I'm showing you here on the right are a series of different ways that we've deployed this campaign, and I'm going to talk to you about those. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the results we've seen. So we've done away with this idea that there is one big campaign, it's a perfect campaign, and we've bought into the idea that what we need to do is actually have a call and response with our community. And that call and response with our community will actually adapt the way that our campaign works. So in this case, we started about 7 months ago with this idea that we could create a false duality, that we could basically take two camps of people, left brain people, right brain people, people from the East Coast, people from the West Coast. And with that, we could actually drive a relationship into the way that our product works, how it can help people no matter the way that they think or what their predisposition of where they like to live is, that they can find a relationship with the way that our product works. So we would begin by introducing an idea in the form of an infographic or a visual, small, not huge. We'd introduce that onto Facebook, into our community directly that we own, onto our blog, and we'd ask for feedback. What's wrong about this? How does this work? Would you make any suggestions? What's the next idea that you think would come logically from here? Is the next idea cat people and dog people? Is it left brain to right brain? This type of interaction for us allowed us to do a couple things that were pretty unique. We were able to take the content that our community was actually giving to us and use that as a part of our paid, owned, and earned media buying strategy. So all the content that we were producing was being shared with our community. They were producing more content with us. We'd take that cycle and then actually pay to promote it to bring more people into the discussion. It became this very nice virtuous cycle for us. This campaign's evolved from those ideas of a duality into helping people recognize how they work within their team. Are you the leader? Are you the medic? Are you the person that's responsible for fixing everything? These ideas come not just because the marketing team internally has them, they come because our community lets us know that that's what's important. The right question you should be asking is, does this actually have a relationship to your business? The idea might be nice, but can it actually drive results? You can read through some of these stats. This is just a 1 quarter view of the last quarter. I'll tell you that this 1 quarter view of the last quarter is related to probably the most important statistic that we have. Our business is driven in large part by the volume of trials that we drive into our business. And when we began this effort and continue to invest in this effort, we actually had the largest number of trials in the history of the company. In fact, that related to the amount of revenue that we drove, the best quarter in the history of the company. In large part, we believe, because of the causational relationship between the community involvement in our programs, in marketing, and how they related back to our product. So in this short period of time, with all of these nice triple-digit increases in core assets that we have on our website and on our blog, we actually drove very real business results. And we did that with our community, not because of our community, not because we were trying to manipulate our community into doing something that we wanted them to do, but because they were participatory in our processes. So we have a pretty good example, 2 examples of why we think paying attention to our customer and listening to our community drives our business and helps our business be successful. So let me first start with an example of us paying attention to what happens inside of our community. And this is a community that's built on top of Get Satisfaction. This guy up here, JHA626, was an anonymous contributor to our community. He was a pretty interesting contributor to community initially because he was responding to a lot of questions that our current customers had. How do you use the product this way? And he'd have a response. Have you ever used it in this environment? And he'd have a response, sometimes even faster than we did. When this guy reached out once to let us know that he was actually having a similar problem to what we were experiencing with another customer, the first thing that most companies would think about is, how do I make sure I respond to him from a customer support perspective? We take a little bit of a different approach. The way that we run our community is collaboratively with our support organization and marketing organization. When we recognized that the amount of interactivity that this one particular person had with us was becoming greater and that he was asking more and more questions, we actually reached out to him as well to get a better sense of who he was. We took somebody who potentially here could have been having a problem that could have just been resolved by support. And we spent some time to get to know who Jim was. And Jim told us a little bit about how our product had helped us transform his life, and not just his life, but his business. So Jim is a consultant. He runs a consultant agency. And Jim uses our product, Mindjet, to actually help run all of his engagements. And he's got a wonderful story, and on top of that, he's just a fantastic person that really likes to share both publicly as well as with his customers about what he can do with our product. So naturally, we love that. So instead of letting Jim just interact in our community by himself, because marketing and our support organizations work so closely together, we were able to spend time with Jim and get to know Jim's story. Jim actually has become a key part of our customer reference group, a part of our customer advisory board. And as you see here, just a small little snippet, he's one of the key areas that we support on our website to help our buyers in their journey for consideration. So taking people from your community, making sure that marketing and the support organizations are thinking about how you interact with them collectively can actually benefit you in a pretty significant way when you think about that buying journey, when you think about consideration in particular. Jim's not only been a person who will represent what he thinks our product can do for our customers to help in consideration, but he actually produces a lot of content with us. So Jim's an active contributor on our blog, and our blog has been growing in readership very consistently over the last couple of years. He writes a couple of times a month, and on top of that, he's been a really great spotlight for us. So much so that this is several months ago that I took this screenshot initially. This was a mail that I just got from Jim just about a day ago. Again, the point here is that your customer community is producing content for you. And in marketing, if you're not thinking about how that can have a relationship to your consideration cycle for your buyers, for your current customers, and for your prospects, it's a big area where you're getting yourself stuck in Death Valley. You don't need to. So let me share with you one last example before I wrap it up. We transitioned as a business last year, actually about 6 months ago, from a perpetual business, so just selling desktop software, into a SaaS business. And in the world of SaaS, to Bessemer's number 7 law here in SaaS computing, it isn't called software as a software, it's called software as a service. And so the expectation is that you have really fantastic service. Part of having fantastic service is actually understanding how the different segments that use your product, that you market to, use your product, and being able to take feedback from them in a very real-time way. So when we introduced our product as a SaaS offering, we actually changed everything. We had 6 different products that were available in market, 6 different go-to-markets, 6 different pricing models, and 6 different channels that they could sell through. We changed everything and thought that we were simplifying it, perfectly simplifying it. One product, one price, it's a subscription, you get everything, and under one simple name. Seems totally logical. All of our polls and our customer feedback and research told us that this is the absolute right thing to do. So we did it. We did this in late September of last year. And we did it, and things got out of the gate well, and we thought things were going fine, and we were seeing good pickup from the sales organization. We were seeing lots of good inbound interest. And then as we started to pay attention to what was going on inside of our community, just within the few weeks after launch, we saw something that could have been a pretty big flag. You actually can't really see this here, but the topic with the most views says, Mindjet is self-destructing. It actually says that up there. And it has the most amount of views and interactions by magnitudes, orders of magnitude over everything else. So for us, we were like, well, everything else seems to be right. So why is there so much interest in this idea that Mindjet is self-destructing? And as we dug into more detail, what we found is that there were a group of customers, and a very substantial group of customers, that were individual users of our product. They hadn't thought about us as a collaboration tool. In fact, Jim, who I just mentioned before, happened to be one of those people. So Jim and several other of the primary users of our individual product that had been very vocal advocates for us were telling us that we missed the boat. While they believe in the vision that we were executing against as a company, we just missed the boat servicing them as a segment. So as a company, you can take a couple of different approaches. You can say, interesting, there's some people that are posting on your community and we're interacting with them, but not everybody else is. You can look at the other parts of your business and say, well, other things are working really well, so let's just keep the road forward. What we did, because we have a belief that our community is a core part of the way that we need to market and build our product, is we actually responded to them. We actually took our product, and while we had one single product at one single price, we introduced a lower priced version that was very specifically tuned to individual users. And we did this within about 4 weeks after our launch. And we did this because we had direct interaction from our community. Consideration of buying is going to show up with the content that's being produced in your community. It's your choice whether or not to act against it. And thematically, all of the areas that I've talked about, hopefully you can see some of the values that you get by being aware of what's happening in your community, making sure that you're using it appropriately within marketing, and when it's related to your business and your go-to-market, make sure that you're responding. So let me wrap up with a couple of ideas. I shared with you a story about Facebook. I shared with you a story about Facebook and how Facebook has grown. While you may not think about Facebook just like your business, think about how they've grown and what they've done to grow. They've used the community that exists within their product to produce content to help them grow. There is no reason that your business can't think about it the exact same way. The content that your community produces with you is absolutely valuable for you. The way that you need to take advantage of it is something that you may have to think about operationally. The traditional idea that you can create the perfect campaign doesn't exist anymore. That's important for all of us to know, so you should start to explore different operational models for your marketing team. Make sure you're explicit about enabling your community to actually produce content with you. It isn't just your own community, but it's the community that exists on Twitter, on Facebook, on StumbleUpon. Anywhere that your brand is, that's where you should be, and you should be specifically mining and asking for content that you can use in your marketing programs. This has been a huge benefit for us as a business. You have advocates. I know it's been talked about quite a bit today. You have advocates, and those advocates that are in your community that are using your product are the best advocates you possibly can have. Help them find their way out into the light so that they can actually be a part of your buying cycle. Don't just let them stay in your community. Bring them out, showcase them, make them a part of your marketing programs that are going to help your sales organizations. And last but certainly not least, pay attention to your community and react. There's a stigma to reaction that I think has a negative connotation, especially in business. Reacting to a reaction to another reaction obviously isn't something that we want to do all the time, but being prepared and having an operational model that lets you respond is something that's hugely beneficial in business today. Your community will always tell you what's working, what isn't working with your business. It's your responsibility to be reactive to them. Otherwise, you will end up getting stuck in Death Valley.